Nearly 11 kilometers below the ocean surface lies the Mariana Trench, the deepest place on Earth. The pressure here is so extreme it can crush steel, and the darkness is absolute. Yet, life somehow survives. But as scientists descended deeper into the trench, they discovered something strange. The creatures became increasingly bizarre. Then, at a certain depth, fish disappeared completely. So, what lives beyond the point where fish can no longer survive? The Mariana Trench is often described as the deepest place on Earth. But that description doesn't quite capture how extraordinary it really is. Stretching for more than 1,500 miles across the western Pacific Ocean, the trench is a colossal scar in the planet's crust, formed where one tectonic plate slowly slides beneath another. Over millions of years, this process carved a canyon so deep that if Mount Everest were dropped inside, its summit would still remain more than a mile underwater. At first glance, the trench seems completely hostile to life. Sunlight never reaches these depths. Temperatures hover just above freezing. Food is scarce, and with every kilometer you descend, the pressure increases dramatically. By the time you enter the deepest parts of the trench, thousands of tons of force are pressing against every square meter. To us, it sounds impossible, yet life found a way. The upper regions of the Mariana Trench belong to what scientists call the hadalzone, named after Hades, the ancient Greek god of the underworld. This realm begins around 6,000 meters below the surface and includes some of the most extreme environments on the planet. For a long time, researchers believed very little could survive here. They were wrong. Modern expeditions have revealed a surprisingly active ecosystem. Strange fish glide through the darkness. Crustaceans scavenge across the seafloor. Soft-bodied animals drift silently through the water column. Everywhere scientists look, they find evidence that life has adapted to conditions once thought uninhabitable. But survival in the trench comes at a cost. Many of the adaptations that work near the surface become liabilities down here. Air-filled spaces collapse under pressure, rigid structures become vulnerable, even basic biological processes begin to struggle as the weight of the ocean increases. To survive, trench animals have been forced to evolve in unusual directions. The deeper researchers explored, the more they noticed a pattern. Many of the creatures living here seemed strangely fragile, soft, gelatinous, almost unfinished. At first, that appearance confused scientists. Why would animals living in one of the harshest environments on Earth seem so delicate? The answer is that strength isn't always the best solution. In the Mariana Trench, flexibility often works better, and some of the trench's most successful inhabitants survive not because they resist the crushing pressure around them, but because they allow it to pass straight through their bodies. The deeper we descend, the stranger that strategy becomes. As the Mariana Trench descends deeper into the Earth, the pressure becomes almost impossible to imagine. At 6,000 meters below the surface, every square inch is being squeezed by forces hundreds of times greater than what we experience on land. Descend even farther, and those pressures become so extreme that many familiar forms of life simply cannot function. For most animals, rigid structures are an advantage. Bones provide support, shells offer protection, air-filled organs help with buoyancy. Near the surface, these features work beautifully, In the trench, they become liabilities. Air-filled spaces collapse. Hard structures can become vulnerable to stress. Maintaining a heavily armored body requires energy that is difficult to obtain in an environment where food is already scarce. So, instead of becoming stronger, many trench animals evolved in the opposite direction. They became softer. One of the strangest examples is the dumbooctopus. Named after its ear-like fins that resemble the famous Disney elephant, this ghostly creature drifts through the darkness at depths reaching more than 7,000 meters. Unlike many shallow water octopuses, it doesn't rely on speed or powerful muscles. Its body is soft, flexible, and almost gelatinous. This design isn't a weakness, it's a survival strategy. Without rigid structures resisting the surrounding pressure, the dumbooctopus experiences far less stress from the crushing weight of the ocean. It simply moves with the environment rather than fighting against it. The same principle appears in another mysterious trench resident, the bigfinsquid. Few deep-sea creatures look more alien. Its body is relatively small, but extending below it are extraordinarily long arms and tentacles that can stretch many times the length of its body. Seen through the lights of a remotely operated vehicle, the animal often appears less like a squid and more like a giant underwater spider suspended in darkness. Scientists still know remarkably little about how it lives. In fact, bigfinsquid sightings are so rare that much of their behavior remains a mystery. What researchers do know is that, like many trench animals, its body is largely composed of soft tissue. It lacks the heavily reinforced structures that would be common in many shallow water predators. Again, flexibility wins, and this pattern repeats throughout the Mariana Trench. The deeper researchers explore, the more common soft-bodied animals become. It's one of evolution's most effective solutions to extreme pressure. Rather than resisting the immense force of the deep ocean, these creatures allow that force to exist around them without causing damage. But while jelly-like bodies help solve one problem, they don't solve them all. Because surviving pressure isn't just about protecting the outside of the body. The real challenge happens at the molecular level, and nowhere is that challenge more apparent than in the deepest fish ever discovered on Earth. By the time we reach depths of 8,000 meters, the Mariana Trench has become a place that seems almost incompatible with life. The darkness is total. Temperatures hover just above freezing, and the pressure is so immense that every square inch is being squeezed by thousands of pounds of force. Yet, remarkably, fish still exist here. Not many, but enough to challenge what we once believed about the limits of life. The most famous of these survivors is the hadalzone snailfish. At first glance, it doesn't look particularly impressive. Unlike sharks or giant squid, the snailfish lacks an intimidating appearance. Its body is pale, soft, and almost translucent. It looks more like a fragile tadpole than a creature capable of surviving one of the most extreme environments on Earth. But appearances can be deceiving. The hadalzone snailfish is one of the deepest living fish ever discovered. In 2023, scientists recorded a snailfish swimming at an astonishing depth of more than 8,300 meters, making it the deepest fish ever observed alive. Down here, where the pressure exceeds 800 times what we experience at the surface, survival requires some extraordinary biological tricks. The challenge isn't just what pressure does to the outside of the body, it's what pressure does to the inside. Every living organism depends on proteins. These microscopic molecules perform countless tasks, from building tissues to carrying out the chemical reactions that keep cells alive. But under extreme pressure, proteins begin to lose their shape. When that happens, they stop functioning properly. For most animals, that's a death sentence. The snailfish solved this problem using a remarkable compound called trimethylamine N-oxide, or TMAO. TMAO acts like a molecular bodyguard. As pressure increases, these molecules help stabilize proteins and prevent them from collapsing. The deeper a fish lives, the more TMAO it carries inside its tissues. Without it, life at these depths would be impossible. It's one of the most important adaptations ever discovered in deep-sea biology. But it comes with a hidden cost. Every additional molecule of TMAO changes the chemistry of the fish's body. As concentrations increase, the fluids inside the animal become progressively saltier. At first, this isn't a problem, but the deeper a fish descends, the more TMAO it needs, and eventually biology begins running into a wall. Scientists studying deep-sea fish noticed a fascinating pattern. Species living at greater depths consistently contained higher levels of TMAO than species living above them. When researchers plotted the trend and projected it farther downward, they arrived at a startling conclusion. There appears to be a limit, a depth where fish can no longer keep increasing TMAO levels without creating entirely new problems for themselves. In other words, evolution may have discovered a way to survive the crushing pressure of the deep ocean. But that same solution may also determine how deep fish can go. And if that's true, then somewhere below us lies an invisible boundary, a depth where fish disappear entirely, yet life continues beyond it. The deeper scientists explored the Mariana Trench, the more one question began to stand out. How deep can a fish actually live? For decades, nobody knew the answer. Researchers had discovered fish living deeper and deeper with every new expedition. Each record-breaking sighting seemed to suggest that life could keep pushing farther into the abyss. But the data was revealing a different story. Again and again, scientists found that the deepest fish all shared the same solution to pressure. They carried extraordinary amounts of TMAO within their tissues, protecting their proteins from collapse under the crushing weight of the ocean. The deeper the fish lived, the more TMAO it contained. At first, that seems like a perfect solution. Need more protection? Simply produce more TMAO. But biology is rarely that simple. Every increase in TMAO makes the fluids inside a fish's body saltier. Near the surface, fish maintain a delicate balance between the salinity of their own tissues and the seawater around them. This balance is essential. It allows cells to function properly and helps regulate the movement of water throughout the body. As deep-sea fish accumulate more and more TMAO, they gradually become saltier. Eventually, scientists realized something remarkable. If the trend continued far enough, fish would reach a point where their internal chemistry would nearly match the surrounding seawater. And beyond that point, things become problematic. The very adaptation that protects their proteins would begin creating new physiological challenges. Water regulation would become increasingly difficult. Maintaining normal biological functions would require more energy in an environment where energy is already scarce. In other words, pressure isn't the only obstacle. chemistry becomes the enemy too. To test this idea, researchers collected fish from different depths and measured the amount of TMAO inside their bodies. The results followed a surprisingly consistent pattern. The deeper the species lived, the higher its TMAO concentration. When scientists extrapolated the data, they arrived at a theoretical limit, around 8,200 meters. Beyond this depth, fish physiology appears to run into a biological wall. What's astonishing is how closely reality matches the prediction. The deepest fish ever recorded was observed only slightly below this estimated limit. Despite decades of exploration, no fish have ever been found in the deepest quarter of the ocean. The pattern is so consistent that many researchers now believe this boundary is real, an invisible line drawn not by geography, but by biology itself. The Mariana Trench continues for thousands of meters below this point. Yet, fish do not. For perhaps the first time in our journey, evolution appears to have encountered a problem it couldn't fully solve, or at least not in the form of a fish. But the story doesn't end there, because when fish disappear, the trench doesn't become empty. Far below this biological boundary, life continues, and the creatures that take over are stranger than anything we've seen so far. Cross the fish barrier and something remarkable happens. Life doesn't disappear. It changes. For a long time, scientists assumed the deepest parts of the Mariana Trench would be nearly barren. After all, if fish, the dominant vertebrates of the ocean, couldn't survive there, surely very little else could. The reality turned out to be far stranger. Beyond 8,200 meters, the trench becomes a kingdom ruled by creatures that most people have never heard of. Instead of fish, the seafloor is dominated by scavengers, crustaceans, and highly specialized invertebrates that have spent millions of years adapting to conditions found nowhere else on Earth. Among the most successful are amphipods. At first glance, they look unimpressive. Most resemble tiny shrimp-like crustaceans, only a few centimeters long. But in the deepest trenches, amphipods are everywhere. Scientists deploying baited cameras often find swarms of them gathering within hours, covering carcasses and consuming any organic material that reaches the seafloor. In a place where food is incredibly scarce, speed matters. The first animal to find a meal gains a tremendous advantage, and amphipods have become masters of finding opportunity in the darkness. What's particularly fascinating is that they seem to thrive where fish disappear. Some researchers believe this is partly because one of their biggest threats is gone. Without fish predators hunting them, amphipod populations can flourish in ways that would be impossible at shallower depths. The trench has effectively become their world, and they are not alone. Deep-sea sea cucumbers, sometimes called sea pigs, roam across the sediment searching for edible particles that drift down from above. These strange animals spend their lives processing the thin layer of nutrients that settles onto the trench floor. It may not seem like much, but over time, it provides enough energy to sustain entire communities. What makes these ecosystems so extraordinary is their isolation. The Mariana Trench is not simply deep, it's separated. Animals living here are cut off from much of the rest of the ocean. Over millions of years, this isolation has allowed evolution to experiment, producing species found nowhere else on Earth. The deeper scientists look, the more unique life becomes. And yet, even the amphipods and sea pigs are not the strangest inhabitants of the trench. because farther below, researchers discovered organisms that challenge one of our most basic assumptions about life itself. Creatures so unusual that it's difficult to believe they're alive at all, and some of them aren't even made of multiple cells. By the time we descend beyond the fish barrier, the Mariana Trench already feels like another world. Fish have disappeared. Amphipods dominate the seafloor. Strange invertebrates roam through the darkness. Yet, some of the trench's most extraordinary inhabitants aren't animals in the traditional sense at all. They're single-celled organisms. At first, that might not sound impressive. When most people think of single-celled life, they imagine microscopic organisms invisible to the naked eye, tiny specks drifting through water, creatures so small that millions could fit inside a single drop. The Mariana Trench has other ideas. More than 10,000 meters below the surface, scientists have discovered giant single-celled organisms known as xenophyrophores. Some can reach nearly 4 inches across, making them enormous by the standards of single-celled life. Imagine a single cell the size of a grapefruit. It sounds impossible, yet these organisms thrive in one of the harshest environments on Earth. Unlike complex animals, xenophyrophores possess a remarkably simple design. They construct delicate structures from sediment particles gathered from the surrounding seafloor and use them to collect food drifting through the water. Their simplicity may be exactly what makes them successful. Complex animals require specialized organs, nervous systems, muscles, and intricate biological machinery. Every additional system creates another opportunity for pressure, cold, or limited food supplies to cause problems. Xenophyrophores avoid many of those challenges altogether. Instead of becoming more complicated, they survive by remaining astonishingly simple, and they are not the only examples. Throughout the deepest parts of the trench, researchers continue discovering organisms that seem to challenge our assumptions about what life should look like. Some possess body plans unlike anything found in shallow waters. Others survive using biological processes that scientists are still trying to understand. Again and again, the Mariana Trench teaches the same lesson. The deeper you go, the less life resembles the world we're familiar with. Many of the creatures living here would seem completely out of place in a coral reef, a forest, or even the upper ocean. Yet, in the trench, they thrive, because evolution isn't trying to create the most intelligent organism, or the strongest, or the fastest. It's simply selecting whatever works. And nowhere is that process more evident than at the deepest point on Earth itself. A place so extreme that it remained completely unreachable for most of human history. The bottom of the Mariana Trench, the Challenger Deep. Nearly 11 kilometers below the surface of the Pacific Ocean lies the Challenger Deep, the deepest known point on Earth. If Mount Everest were placed inside, its summit would still remain more than a mile beneath the waves. It is a place so remote and extreme that fewer humans have visited it than have walked on the moon. Down here, the pressure exceeds 1,000 times what we experience at sea level. Temperatures hover just above freezing. Sunlight has never reached these depths. There are no plants, no photosynthesis, and no familiar ecosystems. At first glance, it seems like a place where life should simply cease to exist. Yet, life is here. Not in the abundance found in shallow tropical seas, but in forms uniquely adapted to one of the most hostile environments on the planet. The trench floor is covered by a fine layer of sediment that has accumulated over millions of years. Tiny particles of organic material drift down from above, collecting along the bottom and providing a slow but steady source of food. It isn't much, but in the deep ocean, every particle matters. Researchers exploring the Challenger Deep have recovered amphipods in surprising numbers. In some locations, these small crustaceans appear to thrive despite the immense pressure. With no fish competing for resources or hunting them, they have become some of the dominant animals of the deepest ocean. Even more remarkable are the microbial communities that inhabit the sediment itself. Countless bacteria and microscopic organisms survive beneath the seafloor, recycling nutrients and forming the foundation of an ecosystem that remains largely unexplored. Every expedition continues to reveal surprises, new species, new adaptations, new questions. The deeper scientists investigate, the more they realize how little we actually know about the deepest parts of our own planet. For centuries, humans imagined the bottom of the ocean as a lifeless abyss. Instead, we discovered an ecosystem built on resilience, a world where evolution found solutions to problems that once seemed impossible to overcome. And perhaps that's the most fascinating thing about the Challenger Deep. It isn't the end of life, it's simply the edge of our understanding. Because even at the deepest point on Earth, surrounded by crushing pressure and eternal darkness, life found a way to persist. Which raises one final question. If we've already discovered all of this in a place we've explored only a handful of times, what secrets are still waiting at the bottom of the Mariana Trench? Our journey began with a simple question. What happens as life descends deeper into the Mariana Trench? The answer turned out to be stranger than anyone could have imagined. We discovered animals built like jelly to withstand crushing pressure. We met the deepest fish on Earth, surviving at depths once thought impossible. And then we crossed an invisible biological boundary where fish disappear entirely. Yet, life did not end there. Beyond the limits of vertebrates, amphipods, sea cucumbers, microbes, and giant single-celled organisms continue to thrive in conditions that seem completely incompatible with life. Every layer of the trench revealed creatures more unusual than the last, each one shaped by millions of years of evolution in one of the harshest environments on Earth. But perhaps the most remarkable discovery is how little we still know. The Mariana Trench remains one of the least explored places on our planet. New species continue to be discovered. New adaptations continue to surprise scientists. And if life can survive in a place where fish themselves reach their biological limit, then perhaps the strangest creatures on Earth are still waiting in the darkness below.